just wait till the Neurolink mandates to make sure everyone is, not secretly thinking about committing crimes before they happen.
Today's video explores the convergence of big tech, biotech, and government influence, particularly regarding surveillance, longevity research, and brain-machine interfaces. The conversation begins with a mention of potential Neuralink mandates and humorously suggests a future where brain implants could be used for crime prevention. It then transitions into an analysis of Jim O'Neill's affiliations with Peter Thiel and his involvement in the Sen Research Foundation, which focuses on longevity-related treatments. The speakers highlight the Silicon Valley elite's obsession with life extension, citing figures like Brian Johnson and Thiel, who are invested in controversial practices such as injecting young blood to extend life. They argue that these efforts are part of a broader trend where big tech positions itself at the forefront of health-related innovations, often using biotech advancements like mRNA and DNA-based therapies.
I also think it's worth pointing out, too, that before we kind of wrap up the discussion on O'Neill here, a lot of his affiliation with Thiel, it's very extensive. We noted in the piece, but also, for a lot of his O'Neill's, after he was out of government and also no longer working for a Thiel affiliated VC, he was working for the Sen Research Foundation, which is devoted to treating longevity related or age related diseases. It's basically, I would argue, one of those sort of Silicon Valley health, quote unquote, foundations that aims to offer life extension technologies. And, a lot of big tech bros are kind of obsessed with this idea of immortality. Probably the most infamous of those is Brian Johnson. And he, along with Peter Thiel, have a significant interest in injecting young people's blood into themselves to stay young, for example. It's true. And the Sen Research Foundation is focused on, using biotech, including mRNA, DNA vaccines, and, technology like that in order to allegedly extend people's lifespans, which is the Sen Research Foundation is also, really exists thanks to the financing of Thiel as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no surprise that you have a lot of people affiliated with Thiel present there, like O'Neill, also Blake Masters, who's sort of like a J.D. Vance type of Thiel creation, whose failed political career was also bankrolled by Thiel. And he was on the Sen Research Foundation with O'Neill for some time. And they're focused on a lot of that kind of angle of biotech as well. And I think it's fair to sort of look, people need to pay attention to a lot of the Silicon Valley big tech and big pharma overlap. I've been covering it a lot since the COVID era. But basically there's been this effort, and you covered it in your piece about the WHO and permanent pandemic markets, this idea of the traditional income model for big pharma has basically run out of steam. It's been telegraphed openly by big pharma itself. They refer to it as the patent cliff issue. And so the way they want to get around patent cliffs, which is basically related to how products go generic and they don't make as much money when they're not exclusive products of that pharmaceutical company anymore. They've been going into biotech, and a lot of that is through joint ventures with big tech companies like Google, for example. And, a lot of those companies also now double as major and essential parts of the national security state, and national security state contractors, and integral parts of the national security, mass surveillance apparatus. And so the idea of having a lot of this, this idea of selling biosurveillance and all of this is a way to improve, market response to healthcare products and all of this stuff, I would argue is really kind of a sly way to manufacture what I think is pretty openly acknowledged as the final frontier of mass surveillance, which is surveilling people's bodies through wearables and eventually through things inside the body, nanomedicines. And of course, I would put brain-computer interfaces, BCIs like Neuralink, in that category. And I think it's important to remember too, with brain-machine interfaces or BCIs, that it ultimately comes to the FDA to approve them. FDA tends to grant them breakthrough device status, which sort of waives some of the quote-unquote regulatory red tape for these things. But we have, Elon Musk having a very prominent role in the government right now. He doesn't have to divest from any of his companies at all in that role, and neither does another PayPal mafia figure who's also now a special government employee, David Sachs, the crypto AI czar. And as crypto AI czar, it's very possible he could partner with someone like O'Neill, who is also a very big advocate for AI in healthcare.
The conversation then shifts to the intersection of biotech and big pharma, emphasizing how traditional pharmaceutical models are becoming obsolete due to the patent cliff issue. As drug patents expire and profits decline, major pharmaceutical companies are increasingly partnering with big tech firms like Google to explore AI-driven healthcare and surveillance. This shift is framed as a strategic move to create new, long-term revenue streams by leveraging biotechnology and digital health solutions. The speakers also point out that these developments are tied to national security interests, with government-backed initiatives supporting biosurveillance through wearables and implanted technology. The discussion suggests that these advancements could pave the way for mass surveillance under the guise of health monitoring, raising ethical concerns about privacy and bodily autonomy.
And see some of the stuff expanded as well. And I would definitely encourage people to pay attention to how this could potentially advance, because it has very Orwellian possibilities if they are collecting not just our data from our external activities and our external environment. There's this really crazy push to surveil everything and sort of mine all the data possible. You have companies tied to the current administration, for example, creating the Internet of Forests, trying to hook up every tree in the Amazon rainforest to mine biodata out of rainforest trees. It sounds bonkers, but there's ambitions to do that to people as well and create the so-called Internet of Bodies, which military contractors and think tanks like the Rand Corporation have been writing about for years. And it's really not. I mean, I think Purdue or some other university like that recently created a whole center dedicated to accelerating the development of the Internet of Bodies. Silicon Valley has been pushing the wearable agenda for some time, and I think we could potentially see the push for that come through, under the guise of health. Initially it was like, look how cool Google glasses are, and look at my VR Apple helmet. And now I guess Facebook has made these like Ray-Ban looking ones that they think will not look as insane on people. Getting a little too opinionated there. But anyway, this really is an ambition of that. And I think, when you have someone like Larry Ellison of Oracle, who was previously contracted to biosurveil COVID-19 vaccine recipients, coming out and saying we're going to have all these AI personalized cancer vaccines. They're going to be personalized. They're going to have to gather the testing data on you after you receive them. And they may not do the same method they did with COVID-19 with like blanket mandates, but it's very possible there will be some other type of coercive measure to try and get people to adopt this, because a big theme, whether it's healthcare or really anything else, like I mentioned earlier in reference to the SDGs, is about creating new markets that will make, this oligarch class very wealthy and entrench their power, and sort of lead to this neo-feudalism in society. And I think this is one of those, ways they could do that, because the only way they can get people to want these products is to create, use public policy as the enabling environment for these markets, essentially. So it's kind of crazy, honestly, to see a lot of the mental gymnastics that have been used to sort of explain away the Stargate announcement, or Lutnick's comment about buying the U.S. government now buying equity in COVID-19 mRNA vaccine companies, or any of the other things we've discussed today. Even when our article came out on Jim O'Neill and his potential to undermine, a lot of these early Maha ambitions, pretty much crickets from a lot of the big influencers in that movement, which honestly, is kind of telling in itself as well. But also just a very little interest in addressing Palantir really at all. And Palantir, of course, is a company that has expanded under every administration. It's a bipartisan It's the engine on which the quote unquote deep state runs. Yet no one in this administration or its supporters really wants to talk about Palantir really very much at all, and how many investors in Palantir, O'Neill included, but also people like Joe Lonsdale was a major donor to Trump. David Sachs is also an investor in Palantir. He's the crypto AI czar. And of course, Peter Thiel co-founded Palantir, and Palantir has has numerous contracts with the U.S. military, and other, every 18 intelligence, all 18 of the U.S. intelligence agencies, also very involved in Ukraine, which Kennedy was a big critic of, as well as the genocide in Gaza, which RFK, of course, is not a critic of. But nevertheless, Palantir has become kind of ubiquitous today. They also run a lot of the data for the British NHS, National Health Service, and they also run it for HHS, which I know you covered recently on your piece about the Palantir-run Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analysis at the CDC. And I think that's worth covering a little bit here too, as we try and wrap up here, to talk about sort of how, a new paradigm, if there's a new quote unquote public health emergency, how lockdowns or any of these other measures that became infamous during COVID might be implemented quote unquote more gently, as a way to make people think that, there's been an improvement over past, after post COVID, when in reality, a lot of these same tactics that are sort of very probable in a future pandemic scenario were really tested out during COVID.
Finally, Webb explores the potential societal implications of this technological shift, particularly the role of government agencies like the FDA in fast-tracking brain-machine interfaces, BCIs, and other biotech innovations. The speakers highlight how figures like Elon Musk, through Neurolink and other companies backed by government-connected investors, are pushing for FDA approvals with reduced regulatory oversight. They argue that these efforts align with a larger trend of creating the Internet of Bodies, where personal health data is constantly monitored and monetized. The conversation also touches on Palantir's expanding role in global surveillance, its bipartisan government support, and its integration into both national security and public health infrastructure. Ultimately, the speakers warn that these developments could lead to a new form of technological control, where private companies and government interests work together to shape the future of health, data, and personal freedom.
Well, they want to mine people constantly for biodata and have the AI constantly awash in data that our bodies generate, because data is the new oil. So you have to tap every possible source you can for data. And the best way to generate data is to continually extract it from something that's alive. So that's why I think, we're having a lot of this push into Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Forests, and all of these things. Because the parameters of a living thing are constantly in flux, right? Because it's alive, it's not inert. And so you can generate a lot of data and the more successful your AI will become is determined by how much data it's feeding on, and also the quality of that data, right? So I think that's one of the incentives here. And again, I think people might sort of be ignoring brain-machine interfaces at their own risk, because there are a considerable amount of ties to that industry from this administration. So again, obviously Elon Musk is probably the most obvious because of Neuralink, which has had a lot of controversies over the amount of animals that died during their animal trials, for example. And if the FDA under Trump is very amenable to BCIs, we could see them potentially commercialized over the next 4 years, because again, those are devices that have to undergo FDA approval in order to go on the market. But there's several companies that are farther along than Neuralink are. One of those is BlackRock Neurotech, which recently received a very significant investment from the stablecoin issuer Tether, which has a lot of ties to Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce. And Tether, of course, is also very much connected to Rumble. Rumble, of course, also tied to Howard Lutnick, also tied to J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Peter Thiel. And their general counsel just became the number 2 guy at the CIA, Michael Ellis. And then they're also connected to Tether also invested really heavily in this firm called Satellogic, which is a satellite surveillance company that's involved in, they're building the Internet of Forests, for example, for the purpose of turning each hectare of the Amazon into basically like a token that you can buy. It sounds totally insane, but it's true. Yes, they're contracting with Palantir right now, and Lutnick is on the board of that one. And
Right.
Steve Mnuchin, who was Treasury Secretary during Trump's first term, is the chairman of the board. So it's interesting that you have people like Musk doing sort of this satellite, digital finance, and brain chip play, and you have Tether basically replicating that play. And they both have significant ties to the government, and they would, a lot of the companies in that web need government approval in order to get their products on the market. I don't know. That seems like a disturbing setup for Internet of Bodies stuff going forward. And I think there's going to be a lot of different ways this stuff is sold to a reluctant audience, which would be Trump's base, I think, but probably not exclusively Trump's base. I think there's plenty of people on the left that are not really interested in this stuff either. But I've already sort of seen people sort of in the Trump supporting sphere say things like mRNA is fine as long as there's no mandates, and sort of kind of changing the realm of discussion a little bit already, or we can't hinder innovation. And a lot of of course, celebrity worship of people like Elon, I think, there's people like Tim Pool that have tweeted very supportively of Neuralink press releases being like, Neuralink, let's go. So, I mean, it's very possible we could see more of that. And then, I don't know. I don't know exactly how they're going to get people to use that stuff, but I think they won't have any problem getting it through FDA approval under this administration.
Thanks for watching. Help support this channel and receive exclusive offers from one of our partners located in the description. We'll see you on the next one.